In a small, quiet town where neighbors still left their doors unlocked, 8 people went to sleep on a warm June night in 1912. By morning, they had vanished from the world of the living, leaving behind a house of silent, covered mirrors, a bowl of bloody water, and a mystery that would never be solved. This is the story of the Villisca Axe Murders. Background: Villisca, Iowa, in 1912, was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. A farming community of fewer than 2,000 souls, nestled in the rolling green hills of Montgomery County. It was a town built on hard work, church socials, and the simple rhythms of the seasons. The Moore family was a pillar of that community. Josiah Moore, 43, was a successful grain dealer and a respected businessman. His wife Sarah, 39, was known for her gentle nature and her devotion to her children. They had 4 children: Herman, 11, Catherine, 10, Boyd, 7, and Paul, just 5 years old. On the night of June 9, 1912, 2 young guests were staying over, Lena and Ina Stillinger, aged 12 and 8, daughters of a neighbor. It was a sleepover, a simple, innocent gathering. The children had attended a church play that evening. The town was peaceful. The night was warm. Nothing suggested that this would be the last night of their lives. Crime, the morning of June 10, 1912, began with a neighbor's concern. Sarah Moore's sister, Hannah, noticed the house was unusually quiet. The curtains were drawn. No one answered the door. She called for help. When neighbors forced their way inside, they were met with a silence that was heavier than any sound. The killer had struck in the dark hours. He had used an axe from the Moore's own woodpile, a tool of everyday life turned into an instrument of horror. The weapon was found in the house, cleaned and placed in a corner. The bodies were in their beds, upstairs and downstairs. The killer had moved methodically from room to room. But it was the details that would haunt the investigators for decades. The mirrors in the house had been covered with sheets and clothing. The windows, too, were draped, as if the killer wanted to seal the house in darkness, to prevent any reflection from seeing what he had done. In the kitchen, a plate of uneaten food sat on the table, a meal that had been prepared but never consumed. On the floor, a piece of bacon lay discarded. And in a bowl, there was water, stained red with blood. The killer had apparently washed his hands, or the axe, or both, before leaving. The doors were found locked from the inside. How had he escaped? The question would never be answered. The killer had vanished into the night, leaving behind a house that had become a tomb. The investigation began immediately, but it was plagued by confusion, lack of forensic science, and human error. The local sheriff, along with the county coroner, arrived to find a scene that was already being disturbed by well-meaning neighbors. The bodies were moved. Evidence was trampled. The axe was handled. In an era before fingerprinting, before DNA, before any modern crime scene protocol, the investigation was doomed from the start. The killer had left few clues. A footprint, perhaps. A strange set of marks on the windowsill. But nothing that could point to a single, undeniable suspect. Theories swirled. Was it a drifter? A madman? Someone with a personal grudge? The town of Villisca was gripped by fear. Doors were bolted. Guns were kept close. The investigation dragged on for years, and the list of suspects grew long. But no one was ever charged. No one was ever convicted. The case went cold, and the Moore family's story became a ghost story, whispered in the dark. Suspects: the first and most famous suspect was Reverend Lynn George Kelly. He was a traveling minister, a man of God who had been in Villisca on the night of the murders. He had preached at the church play that the Moore children had attended. Kelly was a troubled man, haunted by his own demons. He confessed to the murders multiple times, each confession filled with vivid, horrifying detail. But each time, he recanted. He was examined by psychiatrists, declared insane, and spent years in asylums. Some believed he was the killer, a man driven by madness. Others thought he was a victim of his own delusions, a man who had confessed to a crime he did not commit because his mind could not distinguish between fantasy and reality. The truth about Reverend Kelly remains buried in the archives of forgotten hospitals. Then there was William Mansfield, a business rival of Josiah Moore. Mansfield had been involved in a bitter dispute with Moore over a grain deal. He had threatened Moore, publicly and privately. He had a motive. But there was no evidence linking him to the crime scene. He was investigated, questioned, and released. The shadow of suspicion remained, but it never became a conviction. Frank F. Jones was another suspect. He was a powerful man in Villisca, a state senator and a political rival of Josiah Moore. Jones had been accused of having an affair with Sarah Moore, a rumor that may have been nothing more than gossip. But in a small town, gossip can be deadly. Jones was investigated, but again, no evidence was found. The whispers followed him to his grave. Perhaps the most chilling suspect was Henry Lee Moore, a man with no relation to the family. In 1912, the same year as the Villisca murders, Henry Lee Moore was convicted of murdering his mother and grandmother with an axe in Kansas. He was a drifter, a man who moved through the Midwest like a shadow. Some investigators believed he was a serial killer, responsible for a string of unsolved axe murders across the region in 1911 and 1912. The Villisca murders fit the pattern: a family killed in their sleep, an axe from the property, mirrors covered. But Henry Lee Moore was never linked to the Villisca case. He was executed for his other crimes, and the truth died with him. Aftermath: the Villisca Axe murders have never been solved. The case remains open, a cold case that has haunted the town for over a century. The Moore family home still stands on the corner of East and 2nd Streets. It is now a museum, a place where visitors can walk through the rooms where 8 people died. The house is preserved, frozen in time. The mirrors are still covered. The windows are still draped. The silence is still heavy. Some say the house is haunted. Others say it is simply a monument to a tragedy that should never have happened. The legacy of Villisca is a reminder of the fragility of life, the randomness of evil, and the limits of justice. In 1912, a small town went to sleep, and 8 people never woke up. The killer walked away into the night, and the question remains, who was he? Was he a madman, a rival, a stranger, or a ghost? The answer is lost to history, buried in the silence of a house that will never speak. The Villisca Axe murders are not just a crime. They are a mystery that has become a part of America's dark folklore. They are a story of a family, a town, and a night that changed everything. And they are a reminder that some questions, no matter how long we search, will never have an answer.